Hi, welcome to Give Me the Bible, where God's Word speaks for itself. In the last video, I made the rather controversial point that there are no more miraculous spiritual gifts today, based on three reasons. Number one, we do not have modern day apostles anymore to lay their hands on us so that we could receive those spiritual gifts like they did in the first century. Number two, the nature and the quality of spiritual gifts that we see being performed by those who claim to have them today, very different, vastly different from the nature and quality of the spiritual gifts that were possessed and performed in the first century world. Thirdly, Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 prophesies that there will be an end to spiritual gifts. Now what we're going to do is start with this last argument first, perhaps because it's the weaker of the three arguments. It's not weak, but it's just not as strong as these other two, because we don't know for 100% certain what the perfect is in 1 Corinthians 13. So let's look at 1 Corinthians 13 over the next few videos. 1 Corinthians 13 is found or sandwiched between 12 and 14, and that's not just a mathematical point that you're thinking, wow, that's great and obvious, thank you for that. It's a thematic point, because in 1 Corinthians 12 through 1 Corinthians 14, Paul is addressing the subject of spiritual gifts. And the Corinthians clearly had problems with pride. They thought they were better than others because of the kind of spiritual gift they had. They put a lot of stock and special importance on tongue speaking and thought anybody who has a lesser spiritual gift, well, they're not worthy. They're not as worthy as I am. They're not worth as much as I am in God's kingdom. And Paul addresses this in several ways. In 1 Corinthians 12, he says, look, we're all one body. We all have a variety of gifts, but it comes from the same Spirit. We're all one church. And so don't look down on members of the body because they're a different body part than you are. We need each other. We need to value each other. That's what he does in 1 Corinthians 12. In 1 Corinthians 13, he tells them it doesn't matter what spiritual gift you have. If you don't love one another, then it's pointless. He starts off in verse 1 in 1 Corinthians 13. He says, if I speak with the tongues of men and of angels but do not have love, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. So he's saying it doesn't matter what spiritual gift you have. You can have the greatest spiritual gift in the world. If you don't have love, it's pointless. And that's why this chapter is all about love. And in verses 4 through 7, there's this beautiful section about what love is. Love is patient. Love is kind. It doesn't brag. You know, he goes on how love endures all things. It hopes all things. It believes and bears all things. It's just a beautiful section. But what people are most unfamiliar with probably in this chapter is the last section, from verses 8 through 13. And what Paul is doing here is he's showing that love, the reason love is so important, is that love lasts forever, while these spiritual gifts will not. And so let's just read verses 8 through 13. I'll set up what's going on here, and then in the coming videos we'll unpack this further. So 1 Corinthians 13, let's read 8 through 13. He says, love never fails. But if there are gifts of prophecy, they will be done away. If there are tongues, they will cease. If there is knowledge, it will be done away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will be done away. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, think like a child, reason like a child. When I became a man, I did away with childish things. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I also have been fully known. But now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. So verses 8 and 9 are pretty straightforward. He's saying love is going to last forever. It never fails. But the gifts of tongue speaking, the gifts of prophecy, the miraculous gift even of knowledge, having a supernatural knowledge, that's going to be done away with. And the question is, when will those things be done away? And he tells us when in verse 10, when the perfect comes. Now that question is what causes people to scratch their head, because What is the perfect that he's talking about there? Well, let me first say in this video, and then we'll go on in the next couple videos to go deeper. Let me say here, there's a clear contrast being made. I don't think anybody can disagree with this point. There's a clear contrast being made between partial knowledge and full knowledge. In fact, the word perfect in the Greek, it can mean complete or mature or full, as in the full stage of maturity. And so he contrasts this partial knowledge that we have now with a more perfect knowledge that we will have when we reach this stage of perfection, when the perfect comes. And so the next two videos, I'm going to talk about the two main views. The first view, and I'll let you think about this while you're waiting for the next video, the first view is that the perfect is Jesus coming back and the full, complete, mature knowledge that comes when Jesus returns. Because when Jesus returns, yeah, they're not going to be spiritual gifts anymore. We're going to know everything. We're going to see everything very clearly. We'll have this complete level of knowledge that we don't have now. That's one view. And then the other view is that Paul is talking about the completed revelation of the New Testament. Right now, the apostles, while Paul was writing, well, they were writing letters to churches. They were spending time with churches, but they hadn't compiled, they hadn't really finished all of the apostolic writings. And so the perfect would be the more full and complete knowledge that we would have when the apostolic writings and the writings of the prophets were fulfilled and complete. And we're going to explore those two in the next videos, but I just want you to think about those. Maybe there's a third view that you've heard on this passage and you want to share that with me in the comments. That's fine. We'll address that too. But I am sure grateful for your interest in spiritual things. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.